Hi, my name is Dr. Christopher James Ward from the Kansas University Medical Center, and today I want to talk about how to make amine-free immunoglobulin from hybridoma supernatant. So our lab likes to make its own monoclonal antibodies using conventional hybridoma technology, and we make antibodies against proteins involved in polycystic kidney disease like polycystin 1, polycystin 2, fibrocystin, and other proteins such as Cu62. So we do our own fusions, and so these are mouse anti-human monoclonal antibodies. We select a good clone, and then one of the advantages about having a hybridoma is that you've got almost infinite supply of immunoglobulin. You can adapt these to spinners and get several litres worth of supernatant. One of the things that we like to do is directly label our antibodies with either biotin or, in this case, with a fluorophore. And we use NHS technology. So that's N-hydroxysuccinide technology, where there's this reactive group on your dye, and it will interact with amine groups. And so the whole thrust of this protocol is to get rid of free amines such as tris and glycine, so that your dye can only go on to either the N-terminus of the protein that you're labeling or the lysines, which of course have a free amino group. So what we're going to do is we're going to use N-hydroxysuccinide chemistry to label the antibodies. And so this requires the production of high concentrations of pure immunoglobulin in the complete absence of compounds with free amino groups, such as tris and glycine. Okay, and so the way we do this is by never having tris and glycine in the system. Now, there's one thing I need to point out about these dyes, is that these dyes are negatively charged. They have two sulfate groups on them, as well as the NHS chemistry. And that's important because it changes the charge on the immunoglobulin, and you can use that to isolate only immunoglobulin which has been labeled, and get rid of unlabeled immunoglobulin. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. But this is why we're doing this. We need to directly label the antibodies with the dye. So the usual protocol for purifying immunoglobulin from supernatant uses an immobilized protein A or G and low pH, pH 2 to pH 2.5. And so classically they use a glycine buffer, which is then immediately neutralized by tris. But both of these have got free amine groups, okay? And so as you concentrate up your immunoglobulin, you've always got small molecules around there that have free amino groups, which will react with your NHS dye. Okay, and so your immunoglobulin will be very poorly labeled if there's even a trace of glycine or tris around, because they'll react preferentially because there's much more of them. And I found it very difficult to get rid of the glycine and tris, and therefore developed a protocol to get around this problem by never having them in there in the first place. So glycine and tris both have free amino groups and are difficult to remove loss of the immunoglobulin. We developed a technique designed to avoid these problems by avoiding the use of free amine groups or containing buffers that contain free amine groups, and we decided to use pyruvic acid at pH 2.4 to elute the immunoglobulin, and tricine as a neutralizing agent. And so this is our basic protocol. We adapt our hybridomas, reducing the amount of fetal calf serum in each passage. And so we're using a basal medium that's IMDM with L-glutamine and HEPEs and pen and strep. And this contains insulin, transferrin, selenium, ethanolamine, ITSE from in vitro. And so we slowly reduce the amount of fetal calf serum in the medium. We start about 10%, we go to about 5, 2.5, 1.25, and eventually down to nothing. So we adapt them out of the fetal calf serum and into something that's completely chemically defined with ITSE in it. And then we adapt to spinners, which are large bottles with a magnetic flea in them. And basically they whirl the media at about 55 revs per minute to maintain the contact of the cells with the CO2 oxygen atmosphere. And we do that for maybe about a week until the medium becomes about yellow, and we have about 2 times 10 to the 6 cells per mil. And we spin out the cells at 4000 G for 15 minutes, and then filter the supernatant through a 0.2 micron filter. Now we've got an Acta machine, an Acta Pure 25 M1, and we use a high trap 5 mil protein G HB column. We wash the column with 5 volumes of PBS, and then we load all the media. Okay, and that's why you have to filter it. Otherwise, it'll block the column. And then once that 1 or 2 liters has been washed over the protein G column, we wash the column with 15 column volumes of PBS. Then we elute with 10 column volumes of pyruvate buffer. Okay, so this is 100 millimolar pyruvate at pH 2.4. Okay, and then we catch 4 mil fractions into 1 molar tricine, 1.12 mils of tricine to neutralize it. And this avoids the use of any primary containing buffer. And so this is what it looks like. Here we're loading onto the column. This axis is the OD 280. So it tells you how much protein is there. It's a proxy for it. The absorbance at 280. So here's your supernatant going on. It's absorbing at 280. And then it ends and we flush with PBS, and that gets rid of the medium. And then here we change to buffer B, which is the 100 millimolar pyruvate pH 2.4, and we elute our immunoglobulin. This is the immunoglobulin here. So there's probably maybe 20 milligrams there. The OD goes up to about almost 3 here, and then we then wash the column with the pyruvate. So each of these fractions is then being collected into tricine that neutralizes it immediately. So the immunoglobulins are not exposed to acid for very long. Okay, and so these are the fractions that we want. And then what we do is we select the fractions that have got immunoglobulin and then dialyze them on a 100 kilodalton cutoff slide ELISA against 200 millimolar sodium bicarbonate. Okay, again, this is amine free. Okay, and we do this 4 times 500 mils each. So we're really trying to make sure there's no amines and that the pH is about 8.3, so that those lysines are unprotonated and free amino groups are unprotonated, because those are the moieties that interact with the NHS moiety. And then the other thing that we have to do is then really concentrate the immunoglobulin, and so we do that in an American Ultra 50 kilodalton cutoff filter. Now, one of the things we do is we wash this filter 3 times with water in case there's any free amines preservatives on the filter. Okay, and then we concentrate, and we're aiming for about 10 mg a mil, okay, of immunoglobulin at 64 micromolar, or 156 kilodalton protein per 156 kilodalton protein, like IgG1 kappa. So that would be something like 7012 is 156 kilodalton, and so 10 mg is approximately 64 micromolar. And so it's really concentrated. You need that for the NHS chemistry. And so we use the cheapest dyes available, AZ dyes, which are basically Alexa dyes. And there are 3 dyes that we use. We use one that absorbs it 488. It's basically the same as FTSE. 568, which is a red dye, and then a far red dye 647. Now, the important thing about these is they've got an NHS moiety, but they're also got 2 sulfate groups on them, which makes them negatively charged. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do ion exchange on them, on these immunoglobulins, and so that means putting it down a positively charged matrix, okay, so that our labeled immunoglobulins will stick to that matrix, and so will the dye, but they'll come off in different fractions. So to put the dye on, we use a calculator from the website, from Fluoropro's website. We aim to add 5% dimethyl sulfoxide and 30 times molar excess of the dye. So for every 1 immunoglobulin you've got 30 dye molecules. Not all of them will go on, only about 10 will go on per molecule, we hope. The NH dye is made up in DMSO, and then it's quickly added to the IgG and then incubated for 1 hour in the dark. And then we terminate the reaction by adding tris, pH 7.4, 200 millimolar, and that ends the reaction because it's a free amine containing compound. And usually we end up with 5 to 10 mg of protein in 0.5 mils of buffer or something like that. That's what we're aiming for. So we use a high prep QXL column ion exchange. So that means that the matrix is actually positively charged, and we're going to catch things on that are negatively charged. So for this experiment with the IgG1, we used pH scouting and showed that a pH of 8.3 was required to get the labeled immunoglobulin to bind to the high prep QXL, the 1610 column. Okay, the unlabeled protein flows right through, and the free dye is a few fractions after the labeled immunoglobulin. I'll show you that in a minute. So the QXL, the 1610 column, is washed 5 times with 5 column volumes of 100 millimolar tris at pH 8.3 with 100 millimolar salt in there. Samples loaded via a 0.5 mil loop and then flushed into the column in 1.5 mils, which is 3 volumes. And then we do a linear gradient of 10 column volumes from 100 millimolar to 2000 millimolar salt, again in 100 millimolar tris pH 8.3, and the fractions are 10 mils. So the unlabeled protein, as I said, flows right through. The labeled protein comes off at fractions 6 to 9, and the dye has a long smear after this. It comes off in a long smear that you can actually see. The free dye is in fractions 11 to 16, and then we equilibrate the column in 2 molar NaCl to get any immunoglobulin off, again at pH 8.3. Then it's washed into water, 5 column volumes, and then washed into 20% ethanol and water for storage. And so this is what we see. Right, so here's where we loaded, and this is again the OD 280. And immunoglobulin comes straight through, and this is unlabeled, it's got no dye on it. If it's got dye, it sticks to the column, and here we've got a gradient going from 100 millimolar to 2000 millimolar salt, a linear gradient. So nothing comes off in fractions 2, 3, 4, 5, but once you get here, which would be about, this should be about 250, 300 millimolar salt, the labeled immunoglobulin comes off. In this case, it's AZ dye 647 labeled. It's got 2 sulfate groups on it, so it's made it anionic, okay, and negatively charged. Okay, so this is unlabeled, this is labeled, and then the dye comes off after here. Now you don't see it at 280, but you can see it by eye, and it comes off as a smear. And in fact, some of the dye doesn't come off the column, but this is pure labeled immunoglobulin. You can see that some of the immunoglobulins here and here might be really highly derived with fluorophore, but we just pull the whole lot together. And so finally what you end up with is a bunch of fractions that are all definitely labeled, have some dye on them, so some sulfate bearing dye on them. You've got no unlabeled immunoglobulin in there, and you've got no dye. And so again, we concentrate up the labeled immunoglobulin in a Ultra 15 50K cut-off filter, and then store it in 25% trehalose at minus 80 degrees. And that should keep us going for a long time. So if you've got 2 or 3 milligrams of this labeled protein, that should be enough to keep you going for your entire career. Now for 7012, we did it with all 3 colors because it's an important monoclonal against polycystin 1. And so we did it with 488, 568, and with 647. And so with that, I'll end. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually show you how to do this in a practical manner in the lab with another couple of videos. One purifying the immunoglobulin on protein G, and the other purifying labeled immunoglobulin from unlabeled and from free dye using an ion exchange column. And so with that, I'll end.